Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Vanderbilt Virtual VSSA. I am not Beth Bowman. I'm actually Beth's twin sister. Beth Bowman is the director of Vanderbilt's VSSA, and she's the one hosting this program, but she is on a well-deserved vacation this week. Instead, I am her twin, Becky Adams, and so I might look and sound familiar because we're twins, and that's why we thought it would be a good idea for me to take over for her, so it would be a seamless transition. Okay, this week we have early career graduate trainees who are here to tell us about their pathway to their program and experiences that highlight their training. And since today is Friday, we are highlighting our MD-PhD students. So our first speaker today is Yasmin Pettway, and I will hand it over to her. Thanks so much, Yasmin.
Thank you. Share my screen. Perfect. So hi everyone, my name is Yasmin Pettway, and I'm a rising second year graduate student in the MD-PhD program here at Vanderbilt. And today I have the pleasure of sharing with you my personal journey to joining the MSTP. So it takes a village to raise a child is a well-known proverb with unclear origins, but it's an idea shared among many cultures. To me, it invokes the idea of a collective responsibility in that it takes an input of a multitude of different people outside of the person themselves or their parents to raise a child into a contributing adult in society. I thought it would be a good thing for this talk, and hopefully by the end you'll see why as well. So before we talk about what I'm doing now, I think it's important to share where I come from, as we all have different journeys, and my journey heavily influenced where I am today. So my entire life has really been situated in the southeast of the United States. My hometown is Birmingham, Alabama. I went to undergrad at Duke University in Durham, North Carolina, and now I'm here in Nashville at Vanderbilt. Each of these places have really influenced the person I am today, so we're going to talk a little bit about each one. So let's start from the beginning. I was born and spent the first 18 years of my life in Birmingham. And for me, the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, rang true from birth. So my mom, who is pictured here, gave birth to me at the age of 15 years old. Being a teenager herself, having a strong village was crucial not only for her success, but mine as well. During my early years, I was raised primarily by my mother with a lot of help from my maternal grandparents, also pictured here, in a household with my aunt and uncle as well. My mom later gave birth to my brother while in college. And from my family, I grew up with strong values of really working hard to achieve my own goals and to persevere throughout obstacles, as I grew up watching my mom not only graduate high school on time as a teenage mother, but also college and later go to grad school to get her master's degree. And I also realized the importance of a strong support system, as I, and likely she would argue if you asked her, that our collective success would not be possible without it. So early on, I grew up liking school and the process of learning, especially when it came to science. And likely, like most of you all, I was deemed smart, which really just meant that I showed potential to excel early on. My elementary and middle school teachers really tried their best. So I remember in elementary school being bused to a different school once a week for a few hours to participate in like a gifted program, they called it, which was really just an enrichment program for high achieving young students. And they also tried things like having me take certain classes with grades older than I was. And while I was grateful to have these opportunities, it became clear that they really didn't have the resources necessary to support my full potential. And I say this not to brag at all, but to highlight the importance of resources in early environment in a child's life. And so I thought of using this graph as a nice illustration. So let's say this is a curve of the average person's journey to realize their full potential, with max success being the asymptote here. Without resources, those obstacles to reaching your full potential increase. And so a person might take longer to reach the same amount of success, or they may never reach their maximum potential at all. And unfortunately, this happens quite often. I myself would argue that I would fall somewhere on a blend of these two curves had I not had an intervention. However, regardless of whatever curve a person's on, in order to realize your potential, you have to grow to get there. And so throughout my time at elementary and middle school, it was recommended that I seek opportunities that a private school could offer. However, that wasn't really an option for me. So at that time, my mom was in college. And so imagine trying to afford a private school tuition on a college student and young working adults budget. And so I began to look for more affordable options to better suit my learning potential. I found the opportunity in the Alabama School of Fine Arts, or ASFA for short. It's a magnet school located in downtown Birmingham that allows students to specialize in one of the fine arts or math and science, in addition to completing the normal high school curriculum. So to get into ASFA, there was an intensive application process required, but most importantly for me, it was a public school, i.e. no tuition. And so from the grades of 9 through 12, I was a part of the math and science department there. Hands down, this was the most difficult time of my life academically, even when I consider undergrad and med school, but also the time that really set me on my current path, and like the curve I showed you, really my period of exponential growth. However, for a lot of people, added success leads to imposter syndrome. And it began here for me for multiple reasons. So my first application was actually rejected. It was the first time in my life that I had been disappointed, especially academically, but I was encouraged to try again, and I was accepted on the second try, sorry. I also started a year behind in math compared to my peers that began the program in the 8th grade and had to take an intensive math course to get caught up over the summer. And so that really consisted of like 8 weeks of covering an entire Algebra 1 book. And I can promise you that it was full of tears and daily headaches. I was from a completely different background for most of my classmates as well. And by the time I graduated, I was the only Black person in my math and science graduating class. This played a big part because as my growing success became visible throughout the years, I realized that not only was I having these internal thoughts, but others had that opinion of me as well. And so particularly as I began to get into more competitive colleges, some of my peers began to voice opinions along the lines of things like, I was only successful because schools needed to meet a minority quota. My test scores were artificially raised by college admissions to meet their test scores and compare us better, and things like that, which made the experience really difficult emotionally at times, especially during my senior year. And so again, these obstacles made me realize the importance of my village. So throughout high school, I had teachers that not only challenged me past the point that I thought I could be challenged, but also constantly reassured me that I was able to meet their expectations. And so pictured here are just a few notables. So here's Miss Chambers. She was my 9th grade biology teacher, and she always cheered me on in friendly competition with some of my classmates, and was one of the people responsible for really getting my interest in biology started. Here's Miss Cantwell. She was my 10th grade AP chemistry teacher, who also taught me how to quilt as an elective and got me my first job at a fabric store in high school. And here is Miss Legenwa, who was the person who hands down challenged me the most. She was the one that taught that summer course as well. But she also taught me how to critically think. And pictured here is our fearless leader, Miss Chin, the department chair, who will become notable in just a minute. And so I also found my village and friends from other departments as well, who really helped to support me and make me a more well-rounded person, especially when thinking about the arts. But at ASFA, every department had a big project as a graduation requirement. And for the math and science program, it was a research thesis project. And so while many of my peers had parents or family friends that worked in research labs that could easily get them into the lab, I didn't know a single person in research and was really worried about how I would make this happen. And so one day in the 11th grade, Miss Legenwa sent me a sticky note with the name of this program written on it. So my first research experience was in the high school step-up program, where I was placed with a researcher at UAB for 10 weeks. And we were also invited to the NIH in DC, where we presented our summer work in poster and oral presentations. ASFA was also where I was first introduced to the idea of an MD PhD. And so I distinctly remember talking to Ms. Chin one day about colleges, And she mentioned out of nowhere, you should maybe consider an MD-PhD. And I definitely remember scrunching my nose up in disgust and basically saying something along the lines of, absolutely not, that takes too long. And so, as you can gather, ASPA played a huge role in my life academically and personally, and really equipped me with the tools I needed to go on to college in the fall of 2013. From undergrad, a priority of mine was to leave the state, and I had lived there my whole life. And so I decided to attend Duke and move to Durham, which to me was far enough away from home, but still had the southern feel of home. At Duke, I majored in biology and minored in computational biology and bioinformatics. And I knew I had these interests going in, but didn't know what I really wanted to do. And so before undergrad, I strongly considered being a physical therapist. I knew I wanted to do something health related, but wasn't really sure about the MD. And so honestly, thinking back, it might have had some imposter syndrome embedded there as well. But whatever I did, I decided that some of the pre-med prereqs would probably be required. So I started on the pre-med track, but was still really unsure. And then what about research? Although my high school research was on a topic that I would never see myself doing, I liked the idea of research and wanted to give biomedical research a try. And so I knew that the Step Up program had a similar program for undergrads, and so I applied and was accepted. This program had sponsoring centers, including the APS shown here, which meant I could do research anywhere in the US as long as the PI was an APS member. And so I asked for a list of names of APS members at UAB, and I ended up joining the lab of Jennifer Pollock, where I got my first taste of what a traditional wet lab experience was like. This program also had a big professional development component, and so one day I was talking with Jennifer about careers, and she goes, "What about MD-PhD?" I chuckled at the time, but I thought, why not learn more about it? So she connected me with the then MSTP director at UAB, Robin Lorenz, who took the time to really have an honest conversation with me about what an MSTP was and what was all involved. And as most labs do, our lab regularly attended various weekly seminars. One that stuck out to me in particular was a weekly seminar series that included a mix of both MDs and PhDs. And what I found interesting was that each side had a unique way of thinking about the same research problem, and each side filled a gap in knowledge or experience that the other side lacked. It was the first time that I really realized the need for people trained in both areas and admitted to myself that an MD PhD could really satisfy my interest in both healthcare and research. I was still pretty hesitant, so I decided to seek out more opportunities. And so my sophomore year of college, I participated in the UAB Paradigm program, which is really geared towards allowing undergrads to experience what life would be like as a physician scientist. And so I was able to get both research full-time and clinical experience. And after that summer, I finally decided that this was what I wanted to do. Meanwhile, by my senior year, I had taken a biochem course and became really interested in metabolism and its applications in diabetes. And so by that time, I knew I wanted a more longitudinal research experience and decided to do a senior thesis in that area of interest. And though I was pretty late to the game, and after a bunch of cold emails to different PIs at Duke, I joined the Mule Lab at the Duke Molecular Physiology Institute. And it was there that Ashley, a Vandy alum and postdoc that I worked with, really encouraged me to put Vandy on my radar as a place to potentially seek MSTP training. Duke represented to me a place of endless opportunities. So I got to do research, I got to study abroad, TA, and participate in various other extracurricular activities. However, you also have to think about Duke as a predominantly white institution, or PWI. And I was quickly faced with some of the same challenges that I faced in high school as an underrepresented minority, except this time I was much more sure of myself and knew what to do. And with that, you find your village. So for me, the Mary Lou Williams Center started off as a way for me to learn more about Black culture during a work study position, but it quickly became my place of refuge on campus, not only to escape those challenges, but also celebrate my own identity. And I graduated from Duke in 2017, prepared and ready for my next phase in life. But first, I wanted a sort of break from formal academics because at the end of undergrad, I was pretty burnt out. And so I decided to apply to the UAB Prep Scholars Program, which was led by Daniel Buller and Kristen Gavin at the time. And they really offered me the support I needed during the application season, as I really didn't personally know any people who applied to med school or grad school, and definitely not in DPhD. And most importantly, they gave me the confidence I really needed to excel during that app season, as I had been getting conflicting opinions on whether I was actually a competitive student at that point, despite all the things that I had done in undergrad. And so now that we made it to the present, what am I doing now? So I'm a rising G2, which means I've completed 2 years of medical school, so both the didactics and the clinical rotations, as well as the board exams you generally take in med school. I also joined a graduate department, the Department of Molecular Physiology and Biophysics here at Vanderbilt, and joined the Powers and Bristover Research Group. And I'm beginning my second year of graduate school now. My lab is one of many groups at Vanderbilt that are part of the Vanderbilt Diabetes Research and Training Center, or DRTC. And I'm sure I don't have to convince most of you that diabetes is a global problem, but here's a figure of the age-adjusted prevalence rates by a county of diagnosed diabetes in adults. And as you can see, over time, the rates have continuously been rising in the US, especially within the Southeast, and are projected to rise even further in the future. The clinical care of a person with diabetes really requires a team of specialists, especially if a person experiences complications. So the high blood glucose or hyperglycemia that a patient with diabetes has can be managed by a primary care provider, or in more complex cases require the expertise of an endocrinologist. Some patients might even seek the help of a nutritionist to learn about lifestyle changes that they can make to improve their glycemic control. And managing the complications of diabetes require many other providers. So diabetes complications can involve multiple organ systems such as the eye, the brain, the heart, blood vessels, nerves, and feet. And that requires a multitude of other specialists. A person with diabetes may not have any of these complications or multiple complications at any given time, but all physicians, including future physicians on the talk, will care for a person with diabetes no matter what specialty you go into. And so while the pathophysiology of diabetes involves multiple tissues within the body, such as the fat, liver, and muscle, our lab studies the pancreas, which houses the cells that secrete the main hormones that control blood glucose for the body. And so the pancreas is a bifunctional organ, so it has two main compartments. The largest compartment, representing about 98% of the tissue, is the exocrine tissue, and that's what secretes digestive enzymes. And then interspersed throughout the exocrine tissue are the endocrine tissue, called the islets of Langerhans, or pancreatic islets for short. And those house a multitude of different hormone secreting cells. The two main cell types are alpha cells, which secrete glucagon, and glucagon causes a blood glucose to rise, and beta cells that make insulin, which lowers blood glucose. In type 1 diabetes, you have an autoimmune attack on beta cells, and so you lose insulin production. And so these people have a high blood glucose levels. And in type 2 diabetes, your body, you produce insulin, but your body, the peripheral organs are actually resistant to it. And so over time, the beta cells secrete more and more and more insulin until eventually they fail as well. And then you get type 2 diabetes. Considering my future career goals, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to join a lab that has access to a continuously growing bank of tissues from human donors. However, it's not without its pros and cons. One pro is that it's a unique opportunity, and not everyone has the opportunity to integrate human studies into their research. Donors and families really give us a gift when they decide to donate their tissue for research, and it's one that we should all cherish. It's also very translational. What better way to study the human body than with human samples? And unlike animal lines, human genetics vary. So studying human samples allows for the development of more precise and targeted therapies. On the other hand, there are cons as well. Some tissues like the pancreas are impossible to sample, requiring either surgical intervention or post-mortem tissue. This makes organs like the pancreas harder to study in vivo or within the human body. And it's also a very complex system to obtain, process, and store these human samples as well. We acquire donor pancreases and islet samples from various organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit, and the source of tissue and associated project determines what tissue we receive and how we can use that tissue in lab for various experiments. And so the process starts off, of course, with the human donors and their families when they make the decision to donate an organ. And they coordinate with multiple organ procurement organizations. And after that, we have the pancreas, which is procured. Once the pancreas is procured, it is processed by a variety of different centers, including those that isolate the human islets for us, depending on the individual project and tissue type. And as you can see, there are multiple steps, people, and organizations involved in getting donor tissue to our lab. And this doesn't even include the people in charge of delivery of these tissues across the US in a safe and timely manner. As in the case of human islets, our samples must be kept healthy and alive to be used for further experiments. And once the samples arrive in lab, they are usually further processed or purified before they're suitable for our experiments. So the tissues we obtain from these donor pancreases can be used in various ways to study human islet biology and research. And so we might get fixed or frozen sections that we can then, for example, stain and look at different protein expression. Some researchers do studies on live pancreas slices. A big part of our lab is obtaining isolated islets to be able to study them in vitro. You can also study these islets in vivo by transplanting them into immune deficient mice. You can also get primary islet cells from pancreases, and you can use those primary islet cells to either study them in isolation or allow them to reaggregate into organoids that we call pseudo-islets. And some researchers are also looking at stem cells and looking towards deriving them into beta life cells in order to study human islet biology as well. The tissues, a project that I'm working on in lab is utilizing a combination of fixed frozen sections, pseudo-islets, and in vivo transplantation models. And we are using these techniques to study the role that the loss of beta cells and systemic hyperglycemia play on the dysfunction of alpha cells in the islet, which is the main cell type remaining after the autoimmune mediated beta cell destruction in type 1 diabetes. And so we previously found that in islets from human donors with type 1 diabetes, the alpha cells have reduced expression of genes found in normal alpha cells, and they don't secrete glucagon as well as alpha cells from non-diabetic human donors. And we hope that these studies will highlight mechanisms responsible for this dysfunction in type 1 diabetes. So a few take-home points. Some people, like me, won't be born into a village that perfectly fits your career goals, but you have to put in an effort to find your own. And so find your village, which includes multiple mentors and supporters. All of mine allow me to really realize my potential and combat the obstacles I faced along the way as they came. Seek opportunities outside of your own comfort zone and find people to be a part of your village who see more in you than at times you may even see in yourself and are willing to push you. Also, resources and representation matters. And research and medicine are team sports and in their own way require a village as well. And so thank you all for your time. And at this point, I'll take any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Yasmin. So if you have any questions, if you can raise your hand, you would do that by going to reactions and clicking raise your hand at the bottom. And you are also welcome to type in your questions into the chat and I'm happy to read them out. It looks like we do have a question right now from Jeffrey. So Jeffrey, go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away.
Yeah. Hi, Yasmin. I'm actually an undergrad student at Duke, right now. And for me, it's been a little bit tough to find resources to connect with research. Just because this year, with COVID and everything. I was wondering if I could have your contact information to help direct me towards resources at Duke.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I can put my email in the chat.
Awesome. Do you have any general suggestions as well? It sounds like you had some specific programs that you were able to participate in. Sorry, I know you're typing while I'm asking.
Yeah, so these programs for me really kind of made it easier. At that point, I had a liaison through which I could get access to various research labs. However, for my senior thesis, I really kind of had to do it the old-fashioned way of cold emailing a bunch of different people that I was interested in at Duke. And I will say that PIs are very busy themselves, and so don't be afraid to send that extra email and show interest. You really want to, in that initial email, express your interest in their research, maybe include a resume talking about things that you've done with other research as well. Um, and so that's one way to do it. But there's also, like I said, those programs I did as well, which can really take place across the United States. So I will say don't be afraid to seek research outside of your institution as well.
Perfect. Yeah, and Google will be your friend too.
Yes.
So your professors don't always know all the programs either, so you can find some yourself too. Awesome. Great. I think our next question was from Preston. So Preston, take it away.
Yeah, I was just curious if can you hear me right now?
Yep.
Oh, okay, cool. Just making sure. I was just curious, do most MSTPs get to do some sort of human-based research or human-facing research, or do a lot more go into wet lab research, or is that just kind of a personal preference type deal, which one you get to be involved?
It's really a personal preference. So I have classmates, we're all in labs now, who do very basic research on like things like DNA repair, um, up until like people like me who work with primarily human tissue. I also have classmates who do a complete dry lab experience, and so they do primarily like epidemiology or bioinformatics work. And so it really just depends on your personal interest.
Great. Awesome. Our next question was one typed into the chat from Jillian. She asked, what made you decide to do an MD PhD over just a PhD?
Yeah, so when thinking about doing an MD PhD versus just a PhD, it really, the idea of being able to see patients firsthand was really what drew me in. And so if you only have a PhD, you don't really have access to those patients firsthand from the hospital, although you can, collaborate with others, especially MDs. But for me, I really like the idea of being able to see patients for a portion of my time, gather those clinical questions, take them back to a lab to be able to research them and form clinically relevant research questions, and then bring that, hopefully at some point, bring that research back towards patients.
Fantastic. I think the next person who had their hand raised was Chinyalu. Go ahead and ask your question.
Oh, it's kind of like similar. So about like the programs that you were able to get into as an undergrad, is possible if you can like, give like a list of programs?
That I applied, like that
Like
I was,
send them.
what'd you say?
I can like send the list of programs that you were able to like.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, I can do that.
And also, I was also wondering, so if you were like an undergrad again, what would you do differently?
What would I do differently? Um, One thing that I was not the best at in undergrad was finding mentors to support me kind of up front versus when I was like having an issue. And so I would seek that help and guidance early, and really keep in contact with them. So, for example, I didn't really seek the advice of like a pre-med advisor until like I was absolutely sure I was going to do MD PhD. Whereas it probably would have been helpful for me to seek that at least opinion early, because at the end I was kind of, it was partially what contributed to my burnout of like just potentially like thinking of all these things that I have to do that I haven't done yet. And so I would seek help earlier.
It's fantastic advice too from the undergrad professor side too, for us to be able to write really great letters of recommendation too. The longer we know you, the stronger those letters can be too. So that's fantastic advice. Okay, just time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. I think Tucker was next, and then we'll see how long that takes.
Thank you, Yasmin. This was a great presentation. Could you go into a little more detail about how your gap year was beneficial for me? Because I'm thinking that I'm may want to take one because I didn't really get like good research experience started until like about
Mhm.
last year, which I know for some people who are interested in the programs can be a little intimidating considering how much research experience they require.
Yeah, so for me, I guess I was going to do a gap year regardless, just to take a break from academia. Um, but for me, I also did want to have a productive gap year as well. And so doing research was really that avenue that I saw to accomplish that. And so I was actually able to go back to Jennifer Pollock's lab at UAB, which was a previous lab, my first wet lab experience. And so, as an aside, maintaining those connections are good. You should do that. But I feel like gap years are really different from different people. If you feel like you need to have that research experience or you feel like you don't have enough research experience, which I would also, as an aside, get the advice of multiple people affiliated with MDPhDs to really determine that. It can be an option for you as well. But for me, it was really a way to be productive outside of like normal classes and be able to apply to med school as well. But there are other options, research, master's programs, etc.
Fantastic. All right. So thank you so much, Yasmin, for a fantastic talk and for being willing to share your information as well.
Check out our website to find recordings of all of our videos. We'll get them posted about a week after each of the presentations. We can't wait to see you.